Okay, so now I think we almost have a proper setup for our inventory system plus the locomotion system and some initiative for the HUD. Uh, but I think we can further improve our locomotion system because now you can see like whenever we equip a new weapon, right? And if I start to do some sudden movement for the opposite direction, it plays forward facing any, which is fine actually, but you can see whenever I do that motion, the character is actually not aiming anymore, right? So instead of aiming like he's going to sort of a unarmed anim set state and do the transition. Actually, it's not an unarmed state, it's just because of the animations that we are using, right? So as I mentioned before, in this project, we are going to use, or actually we are using Lyra sample project animations in most cases for our base weapon as our base weapon animations. Um, so plus for these forward facing animations, actually we are using echo sample project animations. Again, that is a sample project provided by Epic Games. So I'm just using the free animations of that specific asset. So since of these limitations, actually we have to come up with a better solution for our weapon anim movements, right? For example, like whenever I do a sudden movement, right? Or in other words, like when you start to play forward facing animation, instead of losing the aim, I should be able to keep having that specific aim, but instead at the lower body it should play that forward facing animation, right? So I hope you get what I'm saying. Basically, we have to make some sort of a blend mask in between two different animations, right? Which means actually we are going to override the existing animation sequence on top of a blend mask, right? So I think we have done a similar thing for our animation montages. So if you remember, like inside the ABP locomotion, we have this montage slots animation graph inside our parent animation graph. So here also we had done a somewhat similar thing, right? So we basically sort of tried to blend multiple different animation montages based on their born values, right? Or I can go it inside of the montage slots animation group and show it what we have been done. So here you can see like we sort of tried to blend in between multiple different animation montages based on this specific blend mask, right? So this is actually done for the animation montages, which is fine and which is working perfectly. And now what we have to do is we have to do somewhat similar thing for animation sequences, right? So this one is for the animation montages and somewhat similar thing need to be done for the animation sequences so that we can override existing animations based on certain conditions in depending on the context, right? So for example, in this specific scenario, at the weapon equip, when I do the forward facing, I shouldn't lose the aim, right? Which means like I should play the existing pistol animation at the upper body, and the same time it should play the existing forward facing animation at the lower body, right? Okay, so in order to achieve this animation sequence overridden, actually we have to follow this data driven pattern, otherwise hard code in these sort of overridden values may not be the best case, best suited for our project, because actually all of our animations and anim sets is driven by this data table, right? So we need a way to actually use this data driven pattern and sort of like override our existing animation sequences inside these anim sets, right? So I'm going to do some data structure improvements for our DT anim set. So if you remember, like we have a very structured data struct called as anim set, where we organize all of our general and movement groups. So inside these movement groups, we have multiple different anim structs again. So if you remember, inside like movement group, we have multiple different anim groups, right? And inside of each of these structures, we have defined multiple different configurations. Yeah. So somewhat similar thing we need to be done to override these existing schemas at our anim sets. But since we are going to do some data struct change, it's better to have a backup of this data table, right? Otherwise, if some crashes happen, we may lost our existing data, right? Okay, right. So let's go to our data table instance, and I'm going to export as JSON. So as I did before, all of our data table dumps, or specifically in this scenario, the anim set data table dump is going to be inside this specific JSON schema, right? So I'm going to save it there, and now we had a backup, right? So now I think we can do some structural changes for our data structure. But first I'm going to introduce new data structures, and let's append those stuff, or let's integrate those stuff to this SNM set later on. Okay, right. So this is bit of a complex thing that I'm going to do, but once we have done this setup, you will see the benefit of it, right? And I will explain each and every individual steps step by step when we are integrating these features. Okay, right. So inside the data structs folder, inside locomotion, we have this movement category or directory, where we organize all the data structures related to our movement data. So since I'm going to override a sort of movement related animation sequences, I think it's better to create our animation overridden based data structures inside this folder. But I will create a dedicated folder for that as well, and I'll call it as anim overrides. Right, then let's create a new data structure. Let's call it as s underscore anim override, maybe sequence, right? So this anim override sequence is used for manipulate a specific animation sequence, right? So obviously we need animation sequence reference here, plus some of its adjustable parameters, right? Or like configurable parameters. So we can easily override that specific animation sequence, right? So as I said before, obviously we need the anim sequence, which is anim sequence object reference. Then maybe we can override the start position of the anim sequence, and maybe like what sort of a weight that, or what sort of alpha that we need to apply as the override. So I'll call it as override weight, and maybe the interpolation speed that we require to blend in between multiple different animation sequences. So this should be interp speed, and the default blend time that we need to blend multiple different animations, plus a specific blend type, right? For example, as I mentioned here at the ABP locomotion montage slots, here we have multiple different blend masks, right? It can be upper body mask, lower body mask, left finger mask, upper body, lower body split mask. So similar to that, we need sort of a blend type, right? What sort of a blend that we are going to do considering multiple animations, right? And I think maybe we can make it as a enumeration, right? So it will be like easy for us to toggle in between multiple different blend masks. So in order to do that, I will create an enumeration inside locomotion. Let's call it as E. Maybe let's call it as anim blend type, right? So the first can be none, which is the default blend mask, and then it can be full body, or it can be upper body, or it can be upper body mask. What else? Yeah, I think this would be enough. And maybe we can have the upper body, lower body split mask as well. Let's have it. So we have upper body, lower body, split mask, right? So I think these 5 would be enough, but later on if we need multiple other blend masks, we can easily add it to this specific enumeration, right? And then I will assign it to here, and in blend type. Okay. Now as the default values, as the default blend type, maybe I will give it upper body mask. And the start position can be 0, override weight can be 0, interpolation speed maybe 10 would be okay, and the blend time maybe 0.25. Okay. And then what we can do is, so my main target is to actually override this forward facing animation, right? Because these are the ones actually giving me trouble right now when I'm equipping weapons. So let's start with this animation to as a first step to override the animations. So what I can do is I can create another data structure for that. So inside the anim overrides folder, similar to what we had in here is anim forward facing start. I'll create somewhat similar data structure called blueprint structure. Maybe as not the anim but anim override. So is anim override forward facing start. Right. So let's open up our forward facing data structure as well, and I'll have it like this. Okay, so we need actually 5 of these fields inside our anim override forward facing as well. So I'll just copy and paste it there, and this should be the type of anim override sequence, right? So we'll have all of these configurations to manipulate whatever the anim sequence with the required parameters, right? So idea is basically this is the default start forward facing animation that we have inside this data structure, but if we specify some of the overridden animations inside this anim sequence, instead of playing this one, it will start to play this anim sequence with these configurations, right? That's what I'm going to achieve, right? Sort of like overriding the existing implementation. Okay, so let's quickly copy and paste rest of the fields as well. So we have start forward L90, start forward R90, start forward L180, and finally start forward R180. Okay, so now we have a data structure to individually override whatever the forward facing anim sequence we want with the given configurations. Okay, and then what we can do, let's go and see our SNM movement. So in this SNM movement, we have these stuff plus configurations, and I think maybe at the end of this data structure we can add whatever the anim overrides that we want, right? But before adding it, let's create another anim override movement. So I'll create another blueprint structure called not SNM but SNM override. So I'll open SNM override movement and the existing SNM movement, not the movement group, it should be SNM movement, this one and this one. So here we have start forward facing, which is the default forward facing animations. So similar to that, let's create a new field called start forward facing, and this should be the type of anim override forward facing starts. So we have all of these configurations similar to here, but with more descriptive fashion, because we are going to override individual anim sequences one by one. Right. And then what we can do is we can plug this to our existing SNM movement. Right. So what I can do is I can specify it as anim overrides, and I can add that anim override movement to here. Right. So what I have is now I can actually individually manipulate or override the start forward facing animations. So this approach would be fine, but the issue is actually if I do like this, I can only override at once a specific or a given animation sequence for a specific anim set, right? Only once. But maybe there can be scenarios we need to override the existing implementation in multiple different times, right? Not only once, but multiple different times. For example, let's say like considering the pistol start forward facings, maybe in the movement state, it should be overriding based on multiple different or specific animation sequence. And maybe like when we are firing our weapons, maybe it need to be overridden by another animation sequence, something like that. So based on the context, there can be multiple different scenarios where we need to override our existing animation sequence. So since that requirement, instead of specifying it as like this, let's make it as a maybe a map, right? So as the key type, it should be name, and as the value type, it should be anim override movement. Right. Now, since we done like that, I can quickly add like a field like this, and let's say this is the default state, and that state I can specify what are the stuffs that I'm going to override, right? And maybe like let's say if I'm at the firing mode, maybe like let's say hip fire, and on that state I can specify what are the stuffs that I'm going to override, right? Something like that. But since this is the base data structure, I'm not going to specify any specific animation overrides, so I will clear everything from that map. But I hope you get the idea, right? Basically, like we have the capability to override any given start forward facing animation at multiple different instances, right? Based on the given context. Right. Now I think we are almost done. So we had done a structural change to SNM movement. Now we have to carefully resolve the existing dependencies. So obviously this SNM movement is referenced as at SNM movement group. So let's go there and save it, and we are good to go. And I think that's all we have to resolve. And finally, let's go to this SNM set, which is the root data structure, and you can see like it has been already broken, right? And it is actually expected because we have done a major structural changes for our data structures. But it's fine because we had dumped our existing data table instances or data, so we can easily recover from it, right? So I'll reset this one back to movement group. It's any movement group, right? So now let's save it and we are good to go. And then we can go to DT anim set and let's save it as well. And let's check what happened to our data. Obviously, the previous data has been lost because we made a reset. Now, let's reinstantiate or populate the previous data to our data table. But before that, like I just want to show you like our new data structural change was there. You see, inside the movement groups, now we have that anim overrides capabilities, right? Great. Right. So I can click re-import. So it will actually re-import all the previous data. But it says like, oh, it shows sort of a warning message like it can't find any data records relevant to any overrides, which is fine because actually our dump doesn't has any records relevant to this any overrides because we just added it. So simply click OK and it says successfully re-imported. Okay. Now if you go and check out the rest of the stuff, so all the data is there except this anim override, right? Because we haven't added any sort of data to it yet. Okay, and let's play test and see whether everything works properly as before. Yes, so it works. Walking work, sprinting work, crouching also work, jumping also work, and montages also works properly. Yep, I think everything works properly. Okay. Right, so as the first part, actually I will stop it from here because we have to cover a lot more when it comes to this animation override stuff. But yeah, so as the first part, we had created these new data structures and added these to our SNE movement. So if I brief like what we have been done, basically we created this SNE override sequence, then we created this blend type as well and added to here. So we have like 5 different blend types including the default blend type, and then by using this SNM override as a start, since I'm focusing on the forward facing start manipulations overrides, I created this SNM override forward facing starts and created these fields somewhat similar to SNM forward facing start, but they are override instead. And then I created this SNM override movement and added this start forward facing, again similar to SNM movement, but for specifically targeting to this start forward facing overrides. So I added that field here, and then finally I added it to SNM movement as a map, right? So the map value is the SNM override movement, and the key is any given name, right? And finally, those stuff were reflected at DT anim set like this. Okay, so those were the first steps and the first part of the animation overrides. So let's improve this further in the next part. I'll see you there. Thank you.